evening, Birdie Num Num. Am I live? Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? Guess I'll find out if people start going into the chat room. But yes, this is the Abraxas brief, and chaos is a ladder. Thanks for being here, although I still don't see anybody in the chat room. But hopefully it's being recorded at least. My name is Miguel Connor, and I am your host of the Abraxas Brief. The people are starting to come in. Life is good. Thanks for being here. Truly appreciate you being here. And Mina's the first one. Good to see you, Mina. Always good to see you. Yes, good evening. I hope that tonight we will do part 2 of All About Sophia. I felt that in the last Abraxas brief we really didn't cover enough, and of course we only scratched the surface because there was so much to cover. So I want to cover some more of the divine feminine in Gnosticism. Hopefully get to Mary Magdalene, although that could be a topic in itself. I was thinking maybe I've been doing too much of Mary Magdalene or the divine feminine, so I thought maybe one of the future shows would be Orthodox Jesus versus Gnostic Jesus, and compare and contrast these two figures or two sides of the same coin. But no, tonight we will be discussing All About Sophia Part 2. And if you hear any noise in the background, please do ignore. The family and the kids are having dinner. I am not having dinner because I have, one of the reasons I have given up wheaten flour for Lent, and they're having a giant pasta meal. So, and you may be asking, well, what are you doing celebrating Lent? And well, sometimes you just gotta draw upon the mythology. You gotta draw for self-improvement, for gnosis, and for all that. And I certainly do that. So it seemed like a good thing to quit wheat and flour and all refined sugars for Lent and see where that goes. I've done it many years, quit a lot of things through Lent. And again, I draw upon different mythologies. If it works, it works. Or as my friend Jim West says, just make sure it works. And it's worked for me. So anyway, so tonight we will be discussing, again, as I repeat myself, Sophia, All About Sophia, Part 2. And yes, I should mention quickly, I remember many years ago when I started reading the Nag Hammadi library. I don't think when I started to hang around in meetups in Gnostic churches with other cats, they really hadn't talked about Sophia. But as I read the Gnostic text and Sophia kept coming in, it was one of those, it was a sense of familiarity. I really felt like she was the missing link in the whole Christian text. That felt so familiar. The rest of the Gnostic Gospels felt familiar too, especially the Sethians and the Valentinians, although a bit strange. Obviously, I didn't know what the hell was going on, but Sophia certainly felt familiar, and she's been a guide through this journey. I think, and this is something I was talking to Lawrence Gallian the other day about how Sophia just felt really well. And yes, the texts were unfamiliar, but things have had a lot of clarity with great scholarship and insight from researchers. As some have said, we've had 2,000 years of biblical study and interpretation and all that. It's only been since 1979 that when the Nag Hammadi library came out in English that we really started delving into these texts, and more insights are starting to come out. Rituals, the meaning of texts and all that. And I hope I have facilitated this research for thee and only thee, even if chaos is a ladder and nipples for men. And it should be unfamiliar. It was Nicola Denze Lewis who very smartly told me that the task of the scholars to make the familiar unfamiliar and the unfamiliar familiar. I mean, let's face it, if let's do a Philip K. Dick novel, and some of us had been in some job in Mars, or we'd moved to Mars and our children had grown up in Mars, and then suddenly they came back in rockets many years later, and you came to this earth, and suddenly people were talking normally, like it's no big deal about this text with a talking serpent and a guy parting the sea and God having to commit suicide to save the world, they'd be like, what is going on? This is high weirdness. So it's the same. And it's obvious that in ancient times, these Gnostic texts that seem so strange to us were probably, as scholars have noted, very familiar to the Jewish, pagan, and Christian audiences that they were talking to, as strange as some of these texts are, regardless of which ones you think. So I think my job and our job, you True Seeker Warriors, is to get into that mindset and familiarize yourself with that. Hey, Van Scott here. Facebook sucks. Yeah, you finally figured it out. So let's get down to the business to defeat the Huns. Oh wait, no, sorry, that's from the show Mulan, Donny Osmond. So again, I want to talk about manifestations of Sophia, or the Divine Feminine, in the Nag Hammadi Library. I think if you wanted to talk in modern culture where she appears a lot, I would look at the films of Luc Besson. In the last one, I put a picture of Lucy, which Vance recommended, and I think he hit it on the head. When you look at characters like Lucy, La Femme Nikita, and of course Lilu from The Fifth Element, you see that Besson is really grokking the essence of Sophia, this enigmatic, powerful, feminine figure that is somehow fallen, still has power, still is lost, but is able to sort of redeem herself at the end and find her supremacy, and so forth. So yeah, Luc Besson definitely really understands the Gnostic Sophia. Of course, in popular culture, we can easily go with Alice in Wonderland and Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And of course, some have said, well, it's more Neoplatonist. You look at Frank Baum, who was a theosophist, and so forth, that this is about the soul's high adventure and how the soul falls into matter. And I think that's a good point. I think the story of Sophia can be seen that way. It's one of the interpretations of the myth of Sophia. But at the same time, Dorothy does find herself fighting, you might say, objective evil in her stories, and perhaps Alice too. So it's not the platonic, kindly going down into the world and the emanation of the divine and all that good stuff. It has a little bit of edge, and therefore I put it towards more Gnosticism. How you guys doing there? But not Captain Marvel. No, I haven't seen it. It's rare I get to go to the movies. I think the last one I saw was in beginning of December. I took the kids to see Wreck-It Ralph, the second one, and that was pretty creepy towards the end. So that's I haven't been to the. Oh no, we went and saw Aquaman. I took the kids to see that in January, and they really enjoyed it. I thought it was okay. So, but I haven't seen Captain Marvel yet. So. Interesting manifestations of Sophia in the Nag Hammadi Library. You take a drag, and yes, chaos is a ladder. The Book of Baruch, and I don't think that, in fact, that's not even in the Nag Hammadi Library, but it is sort of a more known, it's a more known Gnostic text, and this one's very interesting. In this one, you have Sophia, or the Gnostic Divine Feminine, takes this shape of a being called Edom, and she is half serpent and half woman. Pretty visual representation. And she's in a relationship with a being called Elohim, and they live in perpetual happiness together in this sort of niche dimension. But the thing is that in this aspect, Eden is representative of the soul, while Elohim is representative of the spirit. And Elohim finds himself thinking of a home he doesn't have, and thinking that he belongs somewhere else, and eventually leaves Edom and travels basically to the eternal realm. And what happens is that Edom, I guess Sophia kind of takes a villain role this way, which she kind of does with the Mandeans, who call her Ruha. She's a demoness. But in the Book of Baruch, she she gets angry because Elohim, the spirit, has left her, so she decides to create the world and take some of his power that was left behind and basically torture creation forever and evermore until Elohim, who's in the world of the spirit, has to send angels and eventually Jesus to sort of redeem humanity. So it's an interesting story, the book of Baruch, and how it changes things and portrays the Gnostic divine feminine. Let's see. Sunshine. Yeah, you read my mind. I'm actually working on that blog post too about the cats with the snake tats that believe all gods were evil. The paradics that should be coming out in the next week or so. Hopefully this weekend I can finish it. But again, I'm still catching up on the loss of the computer and other things. So scheduling as always is a bit crazy about the next podcast or Heretics Anonymous or what's going on. But that's coming out, and some great guests on the way. Some high-level guests I think you'll enjoy. So anyway, let's talk about Barbelo. We talked about her last time. She is the supreme Gnostic female, and she is in many of the texts. Yeah, she's almost in a way. I think I was giving the impression she's kind of like the Virgin Mary, kind of cold, aloof, high up, if you would, perfect, like the invisible spirit of the Sethians and so forth. She is the Shakti, and the invisible spirit is sort of like Shiva. He is consciousness unmanifested, and Barbelo is the energy, how it manifests in the reflection of the consciousness unmanifested. But that is far from true in the story or how Barbelo is represented. In fact, in the last show on All About Sophia, I did mention that nobody knew what her name was. And I was wrong because I had to remember something. And it's from Tobias Churton. Great book, Gnostic Mysteries of Sex. I highly recommend it. It's certainly a spanning book about the Gnostics and how they saw love and sensuality, even in their myths. And as you could, he talks about Barbelo, and he comes up with an interesting theory that he presented to such scholars as Dylan Burns and others, and some rejected it, but some thought he had merit. He thinks that the word Barbelo comes from the Coptic, ancient Coptic, ha Barbelo. And what does ha Barbelo mean? Well, ha Barbelo means wild peach tree. So basically Barbelo is, well, the forbidden fruit. She is the cosmic tree of knowledge of good and evil, and it seems carnal knowledge as well. So Barbelo is not this aloof supreme being that stands higher than Sophia. And in fact, a lot of texts, you might say, in fact, in the Gnostic myths as depicted by the church fathers, yeah, they had all the power. Barbelo and Sophia are definitely interchangeable. So, and of course, I mentioned in the last one that Sophia is called the whore in the great, the book of the great Seth, the Prunikos. And Tobias Churton makes a good argument that Prunikos can also mean the ripe one, not just the wild one, not just the whore or the lewd one, but the ripe one. Again, it's that powerful imagery of the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And these metaphors definitely manifest all throughout the Gnostic texts. A great symbol of rebellion and awakening, and it's usually through the divine feminine, like Eve, who is superior than Adam in many of the texts, and she is the one who stands up to the archons. And bad things happen to her, as you guys probably heard in our interview with Celine Lilly on the rape of Eve. So, good show. But back to Barbelo. There are some very interesting myths in let's see, what's the myths? The Simonian myths, as depicted by the church fathers. Again, you have a cosmic fall and all that for various reasons. I don't think they blame it on the divine feminine, but Barbelo is in charge of making things right. So what happens is, as the archons are down here with creation messing things around, who knows, raising taxes or changing the scores of their children's grades or whatever the archons are doing, Barbelo would flash herself in the horizon above creation, this beautiful figure, the Pronikos, the wild peach tree. And this gets the archons very aroused, and so aroused that they emit their seed. They ejaculate. And later in the Manichaean ones, the Manichaeans later on would take the Simonian myth, and it would be the females would get so excited that they would leak and have menses and all that, and the male archons are just giving money shots across the universe. But in these emissions is where is the divine seed, and Barbelo would just take the seed up to the pleroma and slowly take down the archons. And if you're wondering, that is one of the reasons that the Gnostics practice sex. It was there were many reasons, and Tobias again in his book Gnostic Mysteries of Sex talks about it. We do an interview if you want to see it on YouTube. But there were different reasons: rebellion, making the profane into holy, and other things. But one of the reasons they did it, and this was a group Epiphanius talks about, and the Barbelites, and Barbelites means dirty or nasty ones, and they lived in Alexandria. And it's funny because that's one of the reasons that April DeConnick thinks that the Gnostics were doing sex magic, was because Epiphanius joins them. He admits it, and then he's all embarrassed. Usually when the church fathers when they're creating polemics or lies about somebody being a Satan worshiper or screwing goats or something like that, they're very self-righteous and all that. But if Epiphanius is like, he's very embarrassed, he's sorry he joined them and got caught up in the rich. He was just trying to be a spy. That's all he was doing. So it's likely that this is true. And this is from April DeConnick's Holy Misogyny. There it is. A great book. It's one of her less known ones, but she goes a lot about how the divine feminine was suppressed in ancient times in early Christianity. So she has a lot about the Gnostics. She shows proof that, for example, in early Christianity, God, Jehovah did have an iconography, and he'd have breasts because basically God or Yahweh was seen as nurturing, as a female aspect, but all that stuff started getting taken away. So great book by April DeConnick. But anyway, the Barbelites, or as Tobias Churton calls them, the soul collectors, they to reenact the myth. And remember, Joseph Campbell told us all religion is reenacting the myth. The Gnostics, of course, just knew it, but they knew that reenacting the myth and knowing the myth really gave power to the myth and the gods and the metaphysical world, and how to get back to the pleroma and the collective unconscious and all that. So these soul collectors would have these sex rites, and they would make sure that the men would not ejaculate within a woman, and try to put it in a cup or something like that. And or if a woman, if you ejaculated inside of her, that it would come out, and hopefully she wasn't meant to get pregnant. Then these fluids would then be offered up as a Eucharist to Barbelo, because again, they were reenacting. In ancient times, it was thought that the soul came through the seed. In fact, they thought that male semen had a soul, but also women created a soul, and these two souls could be joined. So the soul collectors, if you would join these two, would offer up this seed to the gods, and it was their reenactment of the souls being collected towards Barbelo, who, as you're finding, is also a very complex divine feminine. She, although we were talking, or it's been said about Sophia's transgression, but we're going to get to that maybe there was never a transgression. So here we are. How are you guys doing in the chat room? I'm going to have a drink so I don't end up talking like Mark Rubio. Try to invade Venezuela or something. But yes, Sophie's nature, or Sophie's choice. And this is something that's been coming to me from more than one scholar recently. As we talk about in the Gnostic myths, and I talked about last show, I think, God, it was a long time ago already, it seems, Sophia commits a transgression. She falls into passion and despair after being cast out of the pleroma, or the eternal realm, or the treasure of light, as the Manichaeans called it. And through her passions, she gives birth to Yaldabaoth and the world, and now she's stuck down here in her form of Achamoth, or the Queen of Hades, as she is called in the Gospel of the Egyptians, just meaning she's in charge of the dead now, like Osiris is, and maybe Persephone. But it seems like she has some sort of victimhood, like she made some mistakes and now she has to pay for it. She's very much a Promethean, Luciferian, slightly heroic, but also an anti-hero, perhaps tragic. And here we are. But as some scholars have told me, perhaps that's not it, because when you read some of the texts, and I will get to that text, I will get two of the texts, she is really not in control. And if you study her voice and you study her story, what you're getting is not, you might say, the Jewish Christian Godman that you find in the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus is, again, he's kind of a victim, he's kind of an anti-hero going against things, he's kind of a god, but he's just caught in a landslide, no escape from reality, and he's got to go through with the story. No, Sophia seems to be more like Jesus in the Gospel of John. In other words, she is in charge. She is the one who is in complete control of all these myths from beginning to end, especially when you interchange her with Barbelo, who's just all-powerful, always in control. So you wonder if Sophia, all this time, this is her playground. We are all her playground, as she's, again, perhaps trying to know herself, trying to express every possibility there is so that she can be wisdom, or for whatever reasons you are. So that's another possibility, another way to look at Sophia. In fact, even in Proverbs 8:22, she is talking towards the end about how she delighted in her glory. She's so proud and happy. Again, you're almost getting this sort of a Lucifer vibe or Satan vibe about it. And then you start wondering, as some scholars, as they read the other text, maybe she decided she was going to take complete control of creation for her reasons. And even some scholars have said that that's how many of the Jews and Gnostics took in Genesis when Yahweh or Jehovah says, let us create man. And so he's not actually talking about other gods or the angels. He's talking about Sophia, because in the Old Testament, Sophia, wisdom, is with God as he's creating the world. So that's an interesting angle to take, and I want to get into it a bit more because it really does get pretty intense. And it's interesting. I was also reading how Irenaeus is getting really angry, the church father in the 2nd century, because he's saying that the Gnostics thought that, he said that the Gnostics were popping up like mushrooms all over the Roman Empire. And he's totally angry about that. And of course, mushrooms do happen when? After storms. The Gnostics were bringing a storm to the Roman Empire. And in case you didn't know, mushrooms have been associated with Satan throughout history. So the Gnostics and the shrooms, wonder if they were using some of that for the rituals. Yeah, dude. But that's another story. And of course, it must be said. And also, Irenaeus ridiculed the Gnostics, saying that they were silly to think that the rain and the waters were basically the tears of Sophia weeping for creation. And that's interesting. I don't think I had actually ran into that the other day. And I remember I've said on this show for many years that Sophia keeps weeping. So it seems I'm taking more of the, victim Sophia, but heroine Sophia instead of the, Kaiser Soze Sophia, who's always in control. But before we get more into that, I want to still continue with Barbelo. Another great place where she appears is in the trimorphic Pretennoia, I think the 3 forms of the first thought. Yes, and of course that's how we base it on the trimorphic paranoia, and that's usually Vansen's great puns. But the trimorphic Pretennoia, which is another Sethian text, is great because in this one, again, you've got the great battle. It just starts with the great battle between Barbelo and the demiurge. And in this one, he's called the three different names: Sakla, Samael, and Yaldabaoth. The author decided just to bring out the three names as well as other Sethians. Sakla's meaning childish god, Samael meaning blind god, and Yaldabaoth, who the hell knows? Some have said it means son of chaos, or it's a corruption of Sabaoth. We don't know. But anyway, she is in this war with the demiurge. It really doesn't say if she's her son, but there is a war, and she comes down into creation three times. One is to basically offer humanity the knowledge that they can be redeemed, and two, the second time, to really take away the powers of Yaldabaoth and his angels, and three is where she finally comes and destroys or changes the aeon, the times and fire for the betterment of humanity. And in fact, in this one, she actually comes and rescues Jesus from the cross. Again, Barbelo and the trimorphic Pretennoia. And she is silent. Remember in our interview with Celine Lilly, talked about the silence of Eve. And this one too, you have she is silent, but towards the third time, she suddenly she finds her voice, and basically, as the author explained, she is the logos, the pure reason of God, not just the first thought, but the logos, the sustainer of the universe. And she also explains and she teaches the Sethians, who are obviously the audience of this text, the very mercurial ritual of the five seals. But as most scholars said, it was probably a baptismal seal, not some sort of video game break through the gates or something like that. It was probably a baptismal ritual. So with that, I think if you get a chance, definitely check out the book of Baruch and the trimorphic Pretennoia in some of the other texts. Let's see, let me look at some of my notes. I'm going to lose my notes. How you guys doing down there? Now we're going to get to Thunder, the Perfect Mind. Now, if you haven't read Thunder, the Perfect Mind, please read it. It really is, and I think several scholars have said this, it is probably one of the top 5 poems in the history of humanity. It's just incredible. It's amazing something like this ever got written. It truly is. And if you read it, I think you'll be impressed. But my God, if you start singing it and reading it, it's magical. It's again, it's incomprehensible how good this thing is. And I'll let you be the judge of it. But and it's captured the imagination of modern culture. I mean, it's been let's see, novelist Toni Morrison's work, Jazz and Paradise, is based on thunder. Umberto Eco also talks about it in Falcom's Pendulum. And of course, it's appeared in other literature. Kern 93 did a song about it. And of course, probably the most, perhaps the most known one is Ridley Scott himself did a Prada commercial, and he uses the narrative, or he quotes thunder throughout this. You can just go on YouTube and look up for Prada commercial, Ridley Scott. But thunder, and we are going to deal with thunder very soon. I did an interview recently with Hal Tossig, who was a co-author with Celine Lilly and some others on a book, the only English commentary on thunder, the only book on it. And it's incredible work. And I think it's a game changer as far as I think about mysticism or Western esoterica or just art in general. So thunder is incredibly good. And it also should be noted, if you missed our interview with Jason Louv on his book on Edward Kelly and, oh my God, I'm forgetting his name. What's his name? John Dee, of course. Yeah, John, his book on John Dee and the Empire of Angels. And I've also noted somebody else noticed this, and I wrote an article about Gnosticism and magic. But if you ever get a chance, read the Daughter of Fortitude section. That's when an angel came down and talked to John Dee, and he transcribed this angelic missive. And when you read the Daughter of Fortitude, you'll find that there's parallels to thunder, they are eerie, and it's incredible. And obviously, no, he couldn't have known about Thunder the Perfect Mind because there's only been one copy, and it was found in the Nag Hammadi Library, 1945, and no church father ever quotes Thunder. So it's incredible when you start making the connection of the Daughter of Fortitude and Thunder the Perfect Mind. And needless to say, both figures are extremely enigmatic and interesting. But as far as Thunder, I want to go back to the point a bit about Sophia, because Hal Taussig, and he'll explain more in the interview, he doesn't think it's Sophia who's the protagonist of Thunder. Now, a lot of scholars like Bentley Layton and Robert Price think it's Eve. It's a reincarnation of Sophia, and she is the protagonist of Thunder. Why is that? Well, number one, if I think it's Hippolytus, I believe, he talks about, again, this group of Gnostic, the Nicolaitans, who appear also in Revelation. And they had two texts. They had the Gospel of Eve, and then they had the Gospel of Perfection. Now, in the Gospel of Eve, there is a passage where suddenly, basically it says, and I heard a sound like thunder. And then Eve goes on this, again, a few beautiful passages about how we're all united, and I am you, and I am perfection, and all that. So scholars wonder if that's why Thunder, she was referring to Thunder, there's a connection to Thunder the Perfect Mind, because it doesn't have a title, but whoever compiled it put a title and maybe was connecting it to the Gospel of Eve. Robert Price goes even further, and he thinks that the Gospel of Perfection was Thunder the Perfect Mind. And then Bob begins to say, like, he says that it's obvious it is Eve or an incarnation of Sophia, because, again, if you read Thunder, there's all these sort of paradoxical, contradictory lines. I am the whore, I am the mother, I am at my wedding, but I have no husband at the wedding. It's not just paradox or contradiction, but it's very intricate. It's hypnotic, it's magical. And but again, you have this character who, with the traditional Sophia, is just going back and forth. She's in pain, she's trapped, she's oppressed, but she is so powerful. I mean, nobody doubts that the protagonist of Thunder the Perfect Mind is a very powerful divine being, but somehow she is stuck in this world. So again, it goes back to more or less the Gnostic Sophia and her struggles in the material world and her war against Yaldabaoth, her son, and so forth, and how she is sort of in a state of eternal schizophrenia or crisis because she doesn't belong here, but she has to restore the world. Now, that's where Hal Taussig disagrees. It could ever be about Sophia, or it could ever be Gnostic. Why is that? Because he says that he is of the school that Sophia is like Jesus from the Gospel of John. He thinks that the character found in Jewish literature in the Old Testament, even in the Gnostic Gospels, if you read it carefully, is Jesus from the Gospel of John. She is in charge. She is in control. She is right up there with God when it comes to the supreme being, when it comes to any sort of power and control. So anything that's happening, it's not by accident. And that's the stance he says. That's the stance he takes, and he makes a good argument. Again, you will listen to it in our interview in about a week or two. I'm just giving you a little bit of the early taste. So you have Hal Taussig saying, no, Sophia is in charge. Sophia and Barbelo are it. The character in Thunder is obviously oppressed. She is in a state of pain. And even if she is sort of rebelling, even though she's standing proudly, even though, I guess, like Eve being raped on the origins of the world, all that, she is holding on to her dignity and her power, and she's gonna stand up through the whole thing, even though she's in a state of chaos and all that because of some certain oppression or depression and so forth. So that's an interesting thing to do, but this is where it gets exciting. Hal Taussig and Salim Lilly and the other scholars who wrote the book, they actually translated it as it should have translated it. So basically what we find out in Thunder is that it's gender bending. In some of the parts, it's actually talking as a male, in some parts as a female. And that, of course, maybe changes the whole thing. And you wonder, well, why does that change the whole thing? Because we've got suddenly this gender bending. Now, Hal doesn't really take it. If you read the book Thunder, Celine Lilly and others, they talk about gender studies, intersectionality, and all that. Even though the book was written in 2010, Hal takes it more of this character is just showing how fragmented it is and how destroyed, but how powerful Thunder is still, or how heroic she still is by standing up to all of this. But in the end, she is basically a representation of all us humans. She is taking care of all us humans and all our different aspects as you are. So that's basically Thunder for you. And yes, Mylene said angels are gender bending. Certainly. I mean, the Aeons are portrayed as androgynous. The Archons are hermaphrodite. So yes, there is that gender bending stuff. So that's Thunder. So I would really suggest you read Thunder, the Perfect Mind, and wait for our interview with Hal Tassig, because we're going to get into even more of this great stuff. And I might just put the audio version here at the end of both lectures of All About Sophia for you. So, but I wanted to end quoting from the book Thunder, the Perfect Mind. I won't read the actual scripture, but what the authors wrote, which I think is very interesting. So let me read it for you. Let's see. Thunder is full of humor, exaggeration, and subversion. Gnostic. It constantly disorients and reorients its audience. It sets up expectations and then turns them, so that moving through its images feels like a walk through a house of mirrors. Indeed, in the unpredictable spaces of both Thunder and a house of mirrors, self-reflection or the self are warped and multiplied, recast and denaturalized with fantastical effects. To be sure, performing Thunder means carrying out a set of strategic destructions. It means being at a loss for who you are and where you belong. Calculated amnesia in a reality saturated with forceful reminders of who and how one should, quote, be at every moment. I think that's a really beautiful passage. I'll probably quote it in the introduction, but it is true. That is the Gnostic way. The subversion against creation, because creation is already suppressing us, the ability to shift who we are and represent everybody of all case and classes in the gutter, and the ability to change ourselves, like the Gnostics, who are very much chameleon and syncretic as they went through with their dangerous ideas. So Thunder, although Hal Tassig would disagree, and I want to have him on back then to discuss why he doesn't even think Gnosticism exists, I think Thunder really captures the essence of Gnosticism and the essence of Sophia. I need a cigarette. I need a drink. My daughter's Barbie or Cinderella cup. So anyway, time has flown. I think we'll have to do another show on Mary Magdalene. I hope you've enjoyed it. What's going to happen now is we'll go with the Q&A for you wonderful people at the Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group. And then for patrons and members, and of course people of the group, you will get the full recording. For non-members out there, we will stop right now. But please become a member or help out. Again, we're all in this together, but sometimes I just need to catch up and get a break and buy some overdue equipment. But your support has been great, and it's been a great journey as we are all like thunder in some cosmic gutter, being subversive, full of humor, satirical, and so forth. Oh, and last, very important too, Thunder or any Gnostic text, or really any ancient religious text, was probably never meant to be read, always orated, always performed in a play. I think you'll surprise when you do these things with these texts. Instead of sitting with a book, you will get a different vibe, a different energy, and probably a very more even gnosis. So probably under the stars, under certain circumstances. So these texts, as I like to say, all religion is art, and all religion is just reenacting the myth. So I hope you find some tools to reenact your myth and create really good art, because that's one way that we can be subversive and stick it to Yaldabaoth, Saklas, and Samuel. So that's it. Appreciate it. And now for the Q&A for the Inner Sanctum of Gnosis.